Well, let's look at the muscular structure of the lower limb. To do that, we have a handout. The handout shows a number of facts related to muscles that can be found in the lower limb. The front and back of this handout contain a list of muscles and various other details and facts related to each of those muscles. So, of course, our first challenge in studying lower limb muscles will be to learn the names of these muscles. And you can see in the first column here that I've highlighted, there are the names of each and every one of the muscles in the lower limb that we are going to be challenged to learn. Along with that, there are a list of features, bone features that the muscles are attached to, which are collectively referred to as the origins and the insertions of the muscles. And those are listed and identified with each one of the muscle names. And finally, over to the left, there are the nerve connections, the human nerves in the lower limb that stimulate each of the muscles. And finally, a column that shows the action of each and every one of the muscles. We're going to study these muscles over 2 weeks. And so in the first week, we're going to attempt to learn the names and the origins and the insertions of the muscles. And in the second week, we will attempt to add our knowledge of the nerves and the actions to that. The columns that are still in white here are simply reference columns, and you will be given both some muscle pictures in which the muscles in the pictures are simply numbered, and the number references here to the two pictures will help you match names to muscles. In our lab time, as we're dissecting muscles in the cat, there's a column here that shows you which of these muscles can also be found and dissected in the cat. And we will be using some human models of the muscles of the lower limb. And muscle reference numbers are also here as well. So these white columns are not to learn, but are simply reference to various study resources. So let's look at the big picture. This seems like an awful lot to learn, but I think as we look at it in more detail, you'll see that if you take the right approach to this, you can learn this information over time. So let's look at the layout of this handout. Here are muscles of the human body, and we want to focus primarily on the muscles of the lower limb. So what muscles will we be studying? Well, we've divided the muscles in the lower limb into 4 basic sections. There are the muscles of the hip, and those are here. There are a group of muscles in the thigh, here. There are, on the back of your handout, muscles in the leg. And there are also muscles in the foot of the lower limb. But for the sake of time and effort, I have decided to eliminate those muscles. Any good textbook that you can find will definitely list and describe and show the muscles of the foot. But for our challenge in this class, we are going to focus on these 3 areas: muscles of the hip, the muscles of the thigh, and the muscles of the leg. If you take these one at a time and attempt to visualize and learn the names of these, you'll be in good shape here. Now, in each of these 3 broad categories, the muscles tend to be clustered in various locations within that area. For example, here on the leg, you can see that all the muscles, the 13 muscles of the leg, have been divided into 4 compartments. Here's the first compartment, the anterior compartment. In the picture, you're looking right at that. When you're looking at the leg, if you feel across your shin, or what you know now to be the anterior crest of the tibia, if you feel to the medial side of that shin, you'll feel that you're structured with just skin and bone. The tibia is there, there's skin overlaying that, but you can feel the hardness. There's no musculature there. But if you feel to the lateral side in the front, you'll feel that there are a group of muscles right in the front of your leg. And that anterior compartment contains 4 muscles. You want to be able to find and recognize those. With no muscles to the medial side, there's just the bone of the tibia. There are muscles in a lateral compartment, just 2. They cluster around the fibula. And then posteriorly, and you can see this on a little bit on the leg to your left in the picture that shows a side view. There are muscles that are structured deep in the posterior side of the leg, and they're in close, attached to the 2 bones, the tibia and the fibula. But there's also then a posterior compartment that is superficial, a large bulging compartment. Sometimes these are called the calf muscles. These are the power muscles for the action of the leg. The action of the leg is primarily to raise the heel, which drives the toes down and propels your body forward when you're walking or running or even jumping. So those muscles in that superficial posterior compartment are those power muscles. The other muscles here are muscles that move your toe or make adjustments to your foot, especially when you're walking on uneven surfaces. So 4 compartments within this whole area that we call the leg. Let's look back at the other 2 areas now. Here are the muscles of the hip, and notice that they are in 3 compartments: an anterior compartment, muscles that would be right where that circle is in the picture; posterior compartment, 4 muscles in the back, one of which you probably already know, the first one on the list, gluteus maximus. Most people learn that when they're in about 2nd or 3rd grade. And then there is a deep compartment of muscles. So in each of the 2 cases thus far, we've had an anterior compartment and a posterior compartment, and then something else. We had a lateral in the leg. We've got a deep compartment here. Something similar now in the muscles of the thigh, 3 compartments, an anterior compartment, and you're looking right at that in the picture, the muscles in the anterior part of the thigh. Muscles in the posterior compartment, again, can't see those in the picture, but we typically call those the hamstrings, generally. And then there's a medial compartment of muscles here. So if you add that up, there are 10 compartments. Next week you will be quizzed on these muscles. 10 compartments, 10 questions on the quiz. So I think it'd be safe to say you could expect 1 muscle from each compartment to appear on the quiz. Now the idea here is to find these muscles in a picture, learn them compartment by compartment, one at a time, and to master the names of the muscles in any image. You'd want to get to the point where any picture of muscles, front, back, side, medial, wherever, you would be able to name and identify the muscles in that area. But you want to learn this piece by piece. You don't want to try to learn too many of these too quickly. And you want to make sure before you learn any other facts that you just have mastered the names here. So let me give you an example of that. Let's just take one compartment. If we took the first compartment on the list, the anterior compartment of the hip, this is a picture that you might be using for that. This is actually a picture of both the muscles in the anterior part of the hip and the anterior part of the thigh. The darker muscles in the picture are the two muscles of the anterior hip. So the idea would be to sit down for a few minutes, locate these muscles in a picture, look at the skeletal features in and around them, and then spend a period of time just coming back to this picture again and again and again, looking at those muscles and reminding yourself of their names and getting to a point where you could cover the names of this picture and still be able to remember the names of these muscles. So that's the challenge. And once you feel like you've mastered one group of muscles, then go on to the next. I'm a big proponent of saying, divide your day into 3 time periods, so you don't have to rush this. And just say, if I normally sleep at night, my day can be divided typically into morning, afternoon, and evening. And if I were to take just one of these groups, none of these groups are very large. Some are as small as 2, but no group has more than 5 muscles in it. Pardon me. No group has more than 5 muscles in it. So if you were to just take one group of muscles in a time period to say to yourself, okay, I have 4 muscles to learn this afternoon. Sit for a moment with those muscles and a picture. And then for the rest of the afternoon, go about your daily routine, whatever it is, at work or at home or whatever. And just continually, every so many minutes, every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, pull this picture out. Just look at those 2 or those 3 or those 4 muscles, whatever it is. Give them names. Spend a moment to just get your bearings and see what part of the body you're looking at. But put the names to the muscles and then put that away. And then 10 minutes later, bring it back out again, look at it. If you were to do that through an afternoon or a morning or an evening, by the end of that period of time, those muscles should be very familiar to you. That group of muscles now are added to a review list that you have, and from thence on, once a day, maybe twice a day if you feel like it, pull that out and make sure you can still name those muscles. If you were to do it in this pattern with 10 groups of muscles, 3 time periods a day, in about 3 1/3 days, you would have all these muscles mastered. You would have lived out your normal daily routine, and yet you would have a lot of human anatomy in your mind. So I would really like to encourage you to approach this step by step, little by little, day by day, and don't take the often typical attachment that students have to leave this, and then try and memorize it all at the last minute. I can recommend to you a website that will help you with this as well. Go to your favorite browser and put the words in Get Body Smart, but type them in without spaces, all as one word, .com, and you will see this homepage that you're seeing right here. And you'll see a list of current subject areas. The muscular system link that's right there will take you to pages that will show groups of muscles throughout the human body. And so you can pick the hip or the thigh or the leg area. You can pick an anterior view or a posterior view or one of the other views. And you'll be able to then look at the groups of muscles. You will see pictures that look very much like this. In fact, whoever put the website together used these images that I'm using here. And one of the benefits of the website is that you can actually eliminate muscles from the picture very easily. There's a little slider bar that will allow you to choose a muscle that you want to focus on. Like if you were looking at one of those two muscles in the hip, you could choose that, and then with a little slider bar, be able to remove muscles one at a time from the picture, leaving just the skeleton and a single muscle in the image. And then you can return it to the picture with all of it. And this would be one of the ways to prepare yourself for an afternoon of study, would be to take one or two muscles, 3 or 4 muscles, whatever, and use this website to get a clear picture of those muscles and their relationship to the skeleton of the body. You can actually print out some of the pictures, or you can even create quizzes for yourself from that website. So the website has many, many ways to learn, but its ability to visualize 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 muscles at a time without the confusion of the other muscles is very, very helpful. So I would highly recommend it. If you're able to browse websites on your phone, this would be, or a tablet, this would be an excellent way to do that. So using visual images, and by the way, there are these images in a blank format on the Blackboard website. So you could go there and find pictures that you can use for study. And so your first task then is to learn the names of all the muscles. Learn them without fail. Okay? So take 3 1/3 days of your life, but without too much effort in any of those. It shouldn't be enough work that you can't live out your normal routine, but have the names mastered. Then, secondly, for this week, I would like you to learn as many of the origins and insertions as you possibly can. Now, let's take a moment and think, okay, what are origins and insertions? Look down the columns for a moment here and see if anything there looks familiar to you. Look at all of the items that are listed in these 2 columns. And as most students at this point do, say, yes, I recognize almost everything in that list, because last week's study was a study of the bones of this same area. And so when it says iliac fossa or lesser trochanter, greater trochanter, tibial tuberosity, ischial tuberosity, whatever it is here, you should have in your mind a visual image of that part of the skeleton. So it's not like we're trying to learn something else brand new. All we're trying to do is match various skeletal features with these muscle names. So that is our goal. Now, what is an origin and an insertion? Let's start with that. A couple of facts related to muscles is muscles act or perform their function by moving bones, and the bones will move across a joint. So it stands to reason that a muscle should be attached to 2 different bones, but 2 bones that are connected to one another at a moving joint. Muscles do one and only one thing. They shorten or contract, And so from wherever they're attached, they're going to pull those two attachment sites on two different bones closer together. So every muscle has a length to it of some sort, and it has two attachment sites, one site at two separate bones. So the way that we define then the origin and the insertion is that one of those ends acts as an anchor for the muscle. If you were in an emergency situation, let's take just an odd one, but somebody has fallen into a river and they are racing down the river. The river is flowing very fast and they're racing down the river, and the river is full of rocks and they might be hurt. And you want to reach into that river and try and grab their arm and pull them out. You would certainly want something, a big log or something nearby that you could hold on to with one arm or one hand while you're reaching out with the other to grab them. You would want an anchoring site for your body, and you would use one arm to hold on to that while grabbing for them with the other. That's basically what is happening with muscle actions in your human body. One end of the muscle is typically attached to a bone that functions as the anchoring site, the site that does not move, where the muscle is holding on. And then that end is typically referred to as the origin of the muscle. The other end of the muscle then is described as the insertion. This is where the muscle would be attached to a bone that is moving. So let's show a quick example of that. Here are the muscles of the upper arm, and the big bulging muscle there you probably recognize as the biceps brachii. It's in the front of the arm. Lots of people go to the gym to work on their biceps, and they typically do curling actions. They grab something heavy with their hand and they pull it up toward their shoulder. And this is the typical action for this muscle in your arm. You can see there is an origin and an insertion here. The insertion is the end of the muscle that is attached to the bones that are moving. And it's those forearm bones that move up toward the shoulder. The shoulder then functions, the attachments of the muscle at the shoulder function as the origin. When I'm seeing the action of this muscle, I don't see movement at the shoulder. I do see movement at the forearm, where the insertion of the muscle would be. So when I look back at my list here and I look at my origins and insertions, I see that the origin column shows the anchored end of each one of the muscles. For example, you can see the iliacus is attached to the iliac fossa, or look at the gluteus maximus. The sacrum and the ilium are anchoring sites for that muscle. And then the insertion column shows the end of the muscle that's moving. So the idea here is, once you know the names and you know where the muscles are located, to then, in a second effort, go back to the pictures of these muscles with a picture of the skeleton and try to determine what the origins and the insertions are. And I wouldn't recommend that you start at the top and just work your way down. I would recommend that you look through the list little by little and try to find ones that are either grouped, where several muscles attach to the same site, or look for ones that in your mind are easier to remember. Glance through all of these perhaps briefly and find ones that are much more obvious than others, and spend your time studying those. If you don't get to every single one, that wouldn't be the end of the world, but you would like to get as many as you can, and it would be better to start with the easier ones. So, let's do that right now. Let's take the very first group here. Let's pretend for a moment that we have memorized the names of these two muscles, and you can see in the list they're called iliacus and psoas major. And let's see if we can put those two names to a picture, okay? So let's say this is our morning, or this is our afternoon, or this is our evening, and one group of muscles has come up, and this is our task or our challenge. So here is a picture of those two muscles. And the names that we're going to apply are the name iliacus, and I think you can guess that that has a reference to a bone called the ilium. The other word is psoas major. Now, that doesn't recall to me any bone feature, but let's look at the name for a moment. The name looks a little bit odd because the first word starts with a P. But a P followed by an S. This is a Greek word. When you have a piece followed by an S, the P is often silent, and in this case it is. This is similar to the word psychology. You would not go to if you wanted to take a psychology class, you wouldn't go to a schedule of classes for Valley College and look under the S's to find a psychology class. Hopefully you would know enough to look under the P's. So the pronunciation of this word with a silent P is psoas. So this is the psoas major muscle. The two muscles then, of the two, probably the iliacus muscle is the most obvious. You can see two muscles in the picture. So let me ask you, make a guess right now. Which of the two do you think is the iliacus? And here it is. I'm guessing that you were right. You can see this is the muscle that is attached to the ilium. So that makes this muscle, this long muscle with several little finger-like attachments to the vertebral column, that makes this muscle the psoas major. So if you spent just a few minutes of your time looking at this, looking at the words, saying them out loud to yourself several times, looking at them attached to the picture, you would then take and put that picture away, come back to it in 10 minutes, say the names again, put it away, come back to it in 10 minutes, say the names again, and maybe within 20, 30, 40 minutes, you might be feeling good about that. And you would then turn this into a blank picture, either cover those names or have a separate picture that is blank. And now say to yourself, can I say those two names? And so I would say, well, there's the iliacus and there is the psoas major muscle. And then again, put it away. Bring out the blank picture again and repeat that over and over and over for several hours. Just a brief 10, 15 seconds at a time, every 10 minutes of every hour. And hopefully by the end of that time, you've seen these two muscles and the skeleton so many times that the names cannot be forgotten. And hopefully by that time, you can see this entire image in your mind. And let me ask you, can you still see that picture now? Can you see the vertebral column there? Can you see the big flaring ear-like shapes to the two coxa with the ilium on each? You see the femur coming down, and can you see that muscle, that psoas major coming down from the vertebral column into the hip area? The iliacus over on the ilium running down? Hopefully you can. Hopefully this image would now be embedded in your mind. And certainly if you came back to it hour after hour, again and again and again, this picture would certainly be in your mind by then. So you would then even move to a place where you don't have the picture, where it is blank, And you're able to feel like at that point you can call up this image in your mind and you can see clearly where the iliacus and the psoas major are. So that is step one. Now, I'm going to take you through how we would work with origins and insertions right now, but this would not be your order of study. You wouldn't study two muscles and then study their origins and insertions. And I guess you could, but it would be much better to make sure you can identify every muscle, that you have every muscle in your mind, and then come back and add the origins and insertions to that. And in fact, in our class, the quiz that you're going to take next week is going to have pictures of the muscles. And I am going to reward you more if you know all the names. I would prefer that you could name every muscle, even if you couldn't name an origin or insertion, rather than learning names and origins and insertions and leaving some muscles out. So let's say that you have now learned every muscle there is. And let's see if we can add origins and insertions to these two muscles. Well, the first step there is to look at the fibrous structure of the muscle. If you look at both of the muscles in this picture, you can see the muscle fibers running through the muscle. And of course, they are going to run through the muscle from the origin to the insertion. So the direction of the fibers leads from one end of the muscle to the other. And I can see here that, let's start with the iliacus muscle. You now hopefully can identify which one that is. And so we would place the origin of the muscle at this end and the insertion of the muscle down at this end. And that's a simple fact. In 99% of the muscles in the lower limb, the origin will be above the insertion in terms of its placement. So here are the origin and insertion. Now, without looking at your handout, the idea is to say, I know the skeleton, I now know the placement of the muscle. What could possibly be the origin on the skeleton of this? And in reality, there is only one feature that you have learned that's right in this location. And you can actually see it on the other side. If you look at the other side of the skeleton without the muscles attached, you can see that that hollowed out area on the ilium is what we call the iliac fossa. And so without having to refer to a piece of paper and a list of words, just looking at the skeleton should allow you to identify that. So the origin of the iliacus muscle is the iliac fossa. Follow the fibers down to the femur. And now what feature is located on the medial side of that bone down below where the head and the neck are? And again, a quick glance to the other side showing the head in the acetabulum. You can see the neck, the greater trochanter. And you would know by now that the bony feature that is on the medial side of the femur, the only object of any significance there, is of course the lesser trochanter. Now I know that because I know the skeleton, not because I read this on a piece of paper. So visually now, I have just guessed what those two features might be. I've looked at my handout to verify that I was right. And because I have this image in my mind, I now have included in this image not only the names that I put to it, but the origin and the insertion. We can do the exact same with the psoas major. Here's the psoas major. And of course, its origin is up here where it attaches to the vertebra. And by now, hopefully, you can name those vertebra. The vertebra at the top of the picture still has a rib attached to it. None of the other vertebra do. So that first vertebra of attachment has to be the T12 vertebra. Then underneath that, the L1, L2, L3, L4, and there are muscle attachments all the way down to the L5 vertebra. So I would list, if I was describing the origin of the psoas major, I would describe it as the vertebra from T12 through L5. I could list each one of them, but I could just say this one through this one. And that would be good. And if you look at your handout again, that's what you see. Now, one other benefit of learning these two muscles together as a group is the fact that both muscles collectively insert on the lesser trochanter. So I get 2 for 1 here. I have two muscles with this one and the same insertion. So these muscles come out pretty well. Origins and insertions. And so now I spend an afternoon just coming back to this image in my mind or on a piece of paper or on my phone or tablet again and again and again, every couple of minutes, and remind myself of the origins and the insertions. And if I'll take these little by little, one group at a time, step by step, I can live a lot of my life and wind up at the end of the week with a whole lot of muscle anatomy in my mind. Got it? That's the basic plan, the basic steps. Now, why don't we do this with one more group of muscles then? Let's take the group right under that, which are called the posterior hip. And if you look briefly at the handout, there are 4 muscles that we would identify in the posterior hip. But if you look closely at this picture, this is a lateral view of that posterior hip because the posterior hip muscles do face both laterally and posteriorly. And I can see in the picture that there are 3 visible muscles. The one that we all would know right off the bat would be the gluteus maximus, which is that muscle that is most posterior. You can tell in the picture anterior from posterior by the patella, I think, if you see the kneecap down there, where you can see the pubis sticking out to your right. So the very large muscle at the back is the gluteus maximus. Gluteus medius muscle is the one right next to that, which is attached right up close to the iliac crest. And then the little slender muscle to the front is a muscle called the tensor fasciolate. And that muscle is smaller and is toward the anterior side, but it's still on this lateral side of the bone, which is still within the posterior location. The 4th muscle, the muscle that you cannot see in the picture, is called the gluteus minimus. So one of the advantages we have within this group is the fact that there is a gluteus family here. There are 3 muscles called gluteus, and there's a big one, a medium one, and a small one. The small one is hidden beneath the others. If I was to remove the 3 muscles in the first picture, you would see the gluteus minimus muscle here. And I think if you were to approach origins and insertions here, you could pretty much guess right away that this is attached, this little gluteus minimus is attached onto the gluteal surface of the ilium. And likewise, you'll find the gluteus medius attached there. Gluteus maximus is attached more to the sacrum and the posterior part of the ilium. But again, little by little, start with just the names. Try to be able to identify each and every muscle by its name, and then go to the origins and the insertions. Let me also give you a technique that is sometimes helpful when you're trying to learn muscle names, and all of these muscles are probably pretty weird to you at first. I've often found it helpful to try and relate something that I'm studying to something else out of my past. And I don't know about you, but right away when I thought, oh, here are 3 muscles, a big one, a medium one, and a small one, that reaches back into my mind when I was a child, and many, many children are told a fairy tale called Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. And what stands out in that story is again and again and again, Goldilocks, when she enters this house in the woods, is confronted with a big something, a medium something, and a small something. A big bowl of porridge, a medium one, and a small one, a big chair, a medium one, a small one, a big bed, a medium one, a small one. And of course, that's because there are three bears, a big one, the papa bear, a medium one, the mama bear, and a little one, the baby bear. And so you could, with a crazy stretch of the imagination, come up with a story called tensor fasciolata and the three gluteals. And out of that, you'd know there's a big one, a medium one, and a small one. So, and locate them within the picture. So that's a crazy little way, but you'll find if you have some fun with it, if you think of some odd and crazy things, those are usually easier to remember than just the standard everyday stuff you're trying to memorize. So there is the four muscles of the posterior side of the hip. Spend a time period, an afternoon or an evening, just looking at these four over and over and over again until their positions, their placements become very familiar to you. And then go about tackling, at another period of time, go about tackling the origins and the insertions of these four muscles. I do want to take a moment because there is, if you look at your handout, there is one bit of connective tissue within the insertion of two of these muscles that you probably wouldn't recognize right off, and I want to point it out to you. A good way to do this is to look at the tensor fasciolata on your handout, and you can see that that tensor fasciolata, which is that little muscle up in the hip, has as its insertion a bone called the tibia. Now stop for a moment and think, where is the tibia? Well, lo and behold, it's way down below. The femur is the closest bone to that muscle, but this muscle does not attach to the femur. It attaches all the way down below the knee to the tibia. And how does it possibly do that? Well, it does that through a long, long piece of connective tissue. This is dense, fibrous connective tissue. And that runs from up in the hip all the way down to the tibia, and that's what the name implies, iliotibial, from the ilium down to the tibia. And it's a tract. It's a good way to envision it is that it is a belt of connective tissue, that white connective tissue. And that allows the tensor fasciolata muscle to be attached all the way down to the tibia. And not only that, but if you look back at the gluteus maximus muscle, look at its insertion, it actually has two insertions, one onto the structure called the gluteal tuberosity of the femur, and this is where the muscle powers the movement of your femur. But some of the muscle fibers are attached into this iliotibial tract and function with the tensor fasciolata to tighten this connective tissue. This connective tissue supports the lateral side of your knee and your hip joints, because whenever you're walking, they take extra pressure. There's extra pressure out against the lateral side of both your hip and your knee. And so these two muscles are just, they don't have any movement function in this case, really. It's just a support function. And whenever you put pressure toward the outside of your knee or your hip, these muscles come into play to tighten and support the outside of those two joints. So that's a good start here. Here is your list. We're going to ignore the nerve and the action columns here and take a week, and maybe a little bit more, to try to make sure we have studied and learned the names of the muscles and the origins and insertions, and both on this front side that shows the hip and the thigh area, and also this posterior side that shows all the muscles of the leg. I do have a second lecture for you that will help you attack more of these origins and insertions At the bottom of the handout that you see right here, I show a list of 5 pieces of dense connective tissue. One of those, the first one, is the iliotibial tract that I just showed you. But there are 4 other pieces that you should be familiar with. They will appear in the origin insertion columns here, and I'll take a little time to familiarize you with those. So, you don't have to really get to that right this moment. Right now you have enough information to study all the names of the muscles. But as you approach your study of the origins and the insertions, take that second lecture that I have, and that will help you with your study of the origins and insertions. Okay? Good deal. And study well.